Welcome, everyone. This is Ron Visconti with Phase2Careers, and I'm with Steve Budd, and this is Career Conversations. And the topic today is writing and creating compelling accomplishment stories. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ron.
So, this is a big topic. How did you initially get interested in accomplishment stories?
Great question. I think it goes back to kind of my own experiences interviewing for jobs, being interviewed, and realizing the importance of having an accomplishment story, being able to share a good story about what I've accomplished, what I've achieved, goals that I've set and achieved over the years in past jobs or prior experiences outside of jobs. And also, as a coach, I've worked with clients who either don't have an accomplishment story or they haven't really worked on telling it well or fine tuning it. And so I've been able to, I saw a need out there basically to help people with their accomplishment stories. And as a storyteller myself, I had a natural interest in telling a good story.
So help us out very briefly. What is an accomplishment story and why is it so important to interviewers?
Well, think about most of the job interviews you've had. Chances are during the interview, the interviewer has asked you, what are you most proud of? What's the most important goal you've accomplished? What's your most impressive achievement? They're going to ask that question. You need a good answer, and that's the answer is your accomplishment story. And the reason that interviewers ask that question is they want to learn, of course, more about you. They want to learn about your work ethic, about your core values, and the kind of projects that you've handled in the past.
Okay. In later on, I'm sure you'll give us some examples of many accomplishment stories. So, you know, a lot of us feel that doesn't it kind of sound like bragging when you tell an accomplishment story? So is that why people are kind of sheepish about giving their stories?
Yes, absolutely. I think, in our culture, hopefully rightly so, there's kind of a bias against bragging. Um, Maybe unless you're a celebrity or a sports star, where it seems to come with the territory to do some bragging. It's always refreshing, though, when you encounter a celebrity or athlete, superstar who's humble and modest. But I think for most of us, modesty is a value. And so because we have that ingrained in us, part of it could go back to certain, lessons we got from our parents. Don't be so full of yourself, or from other figures, adult authority figures who maybe called us on it if we seem to be too big for our britches, that expression, that kind of thing. So, and I think religiously, I mean, Christianity, pride is one of the seven deadly sins, right, or mortal
Mhm.
sins. And Greek mythology, hubris is excessive pride is considered a sin. There's that story you might know of Arachne, the Greek myth about Arachne, a mere mortal who was a wonderful weaver, but she, bragged about her weaving, said she was better than the goddess Athena. The goddess got mad and turned Arachne into a spider. So there's that sense of you're going to get punished if you brag. So I think, yeah, there's kind of that bias, if you will, or cultural standard against bragging. So sometimes people get into a job interview situation and they might feel like, well, I don't want to brag. I don't want to sound like I'm, cocky or arrogant or too full of myself. But I mean, you have to understand that you're being asked to share your biggest accomplishment or achievement, and you have to blow your horn a little bit. You can't be afraid to do that. And of course, do it without sounding cocky or arrogant or full of yourself. But that's one of the things I work on with clients is, and I can't stress that enough, you need to practice telling your story before you get into the job interview. So even whether it's with a significant other, a spouse, a friend, a coach, practice the story numerous times, even just telling it to yourself in front of the mirror, or practicing it while you're driving in the car or taking a walk, and just get comfortable with the story and know that you want to share it in the best possible way, to put yourself in the best possible light, because you want the job.
No, absolutely. All of this makes sense. So, take us through the elements of a successful accomplishment story. Can you give us some pointers?
Absolutely. Of course, like any good story, it has a good beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's a formula, the STAR formula. That's a very effective and useful formula to think about and to use when crafting your own accomplishment story. STAR, it's an acronym. ST stands for situation or task. So that's the beginning of the story, setting the scene, letting us know the circumstances. What were you asked to do, or what did you volunteer to do? What project did you take on? What was going on, at the beginning when you first set out to achieve this goal or accomplishment or achievement. And then the A is the approach. That's kind of the middle of the story when you were struggling, working hard to tackle this project or problem, to solve it. You had to come up with a solution. Maybe you had to work with other people. Maybe you had to delegate responsibility, do some research. It could take any number of things as part of your approach. Pound the pavement, maybe, if you were in sales, get on the phones, as the case may be. And then the R of STAR, it's the end of the story. That's the results that you achieve. So you want to make sure you pick a story where you have good results. Otherwise, probably pick a different story, unless somehow you can spin it in a way that still puts you and your achievement, your efforts in a good light. But basically, the ST, again, is the situation and the task, the situation and the task. The A is the approach you took to that task, and the R, the results you achieve. So that's a really good formula to use to come up with a well-crafted accomplishment story. And again, to practice it a lot, kind of like an actor rehearsing lines. Make sure you practice your story and run it by a test audience of friends and family.
So you've worked with a lot of people in putting together these stories.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see? What is there a common theme of what people need more of that you find?
Sometimes people tell the story in a way it's just too short. They give the bare bones, basic elements of it. It's nice to have a little bit of drama in there, and I think conflict is, the heart of drama. It's the heart of any good story, and it should be the heart of your accomplishment story. So some kind of conflict, some struggle, could be around what your company or organization was struggling with, a problem that the company was having that needed to be solved, needed to be tackled. So you create some drama, some suspense, if you will, around that, the conflict that the company was going through, or you maybe as an independent business person, something that you were working on. Again, it could be a story that comes from outside of your vocation. Maybe it's from a volunteer organization you were working for, something that you volunteered to do for, say, the Boy Scouts or Red Cross or any kind of organization helping the homeless. And it could be a great story there. Again, some kind of conflict, some problem that you struggled with. Maybe other people were struggling with something and you stepped in to solve that struggle. I think that's the key element. And then, of course, results. It can be kind of qualitative, qualitative results, like the results were an increase in company morale. But quantitative results are probably the best, where you can speak to, the amount of money that you brought in, increasing the budget, decreasing loss, increasing sales, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So that brings up a question about length. You want to grab people's attention, yet you don't want to go too long.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts about that?
Again, I think part of that's how long do you have for the interview, what kind of rapport do you have with the interviewer. But in general, I'd say like 2 minutes, would be probably a max. And it could be less, could be a minute and a half. Again, practice it. But if it's, 15 seconds, that's too short. 30 seconds is too short. You're giving yourself kind of short shrift in that case. And you're not putting yourself in the spotlight enough. That's what you have to get comfortable doing, because this interviewer wants to know, they want to hire you. I mean, look at it that way. They want to hire you. They want to find the right person for the job. You want to be that right person. You have to put yourself in the best possible light so that you appear to be the right person. At the very least, you want to get invited back for the next round of interviews. And more than that, you want to get the job.
Wanted to ask you how relevant past, accomplishments are. So let's say you haven't been working in a while and you have some great accomplishments. Does it matter in your mind?
I don't think it matters that much. I think what matters most of all is the accomplishment and telling a good story about it. And I think that'll be compelling to your interviewer. If they want to worry about, let them worry about, when it was, or if they want to ask you how long ago that was. You don't have to volunteer that information necessarily. And it doesn't have to be part of your story that this happened 30 years ago. Just tell the story of your accomplishment in sales, or your accomplishment in IT, or social work, or whatever the case was, in teaching, something that you did. Chances are they'll have an idea when it was, but I think it still reflects who you are as a person. And if you're telling that story in a way that makes it sound current, it reflects who you are, who you continue to be today.
Oh, good point. So could you give us a couple of stories of people you've worked with or yourself where there was the start of a story, but how it got made better?
Sure, I can share a story of my own from experience working in sales. And I think my first version of the story was that I was working for a magazine, a tourist magazine. I was actually living in Tel Aviv at the time. And the first version is, just that I was selling advertising for this tourist magazine. It was a tough job, one of those kind of entry-level pound the pavement kind of jobs. And I had the idea to put a focus on a particular street, and I wanted the magazine to run, like a 2-page spread on the street to help me encourage people to buy ads. And they agreed, and I did. I mean, that's not a great version of the story, but that's kind of the beginning, middle, and end in a very bare bones fashion. So that was my kind of initial version of the story. But I realized also at the time, working with a coach myself, we realized I needed to spruce up that story a little bit, flesh it out. And so I can tell you, so I'll give you like the more evolved version of the story is, I'm working for a tourist magazine in Tel Aviv, and I'm selling display ads, pounding the pavement, and it's a tough job. And I had this idea, that I could maybe bring in some businesses on a street that I felt like I discovered it. It was a pretty trendy street, but it was outside of the city center. So I knew a lot of tourists didn't go there, but I thought they should. It wasn't that far away. So I had the idea of the magazine creating a 2-page spread with a little story about the street, and then all the ads, of course, around it. But I needed to convince the owner of the magazine to do this, and he was reluctant at first. He was kind of skeptical about that street being a little outside of the city center, and wasn't something they had done before. And I just kept talking to him about it. I kept, spending time on the street, and then giving him information about the street, the kind of shops that were there that I thought would really be appealing and attractive to tourists. And finally, he agreed if I brought in 10 advertisers, then he would do the 2-page spread. And it was a huge challenge, trying to bring in 10 advertisers, dealing with people's objections that, you always get in sales. It costs too much, advertising doesn't work, or in that case, people not being sure tourists would come over there. And I said, well, I'm a tourist, I'm here, I love this street, and I believe other tourists would love this street too. I brought in one. As you probably know, if you've been in sales, once you bring in one person, then it's easier to bring in a second person, and then you start to share that with other business owners. Next thing you know, a third shop came in, and then another restaurant, another bar. I had a dozen businesses come in, and the magazine happily ran that 2-page spread, which became a regular part of the magazine. And so there it is. There's my story, a better version of it, which I think shows a lot of things. Let me ask you, Ron. Let me turn the tables on you, and I'll become the interviewer for a second. What do you think are some of the qualities that come through about me as a candidate in telling that story?
Absolutely. I think from that story, I sense creativity because you creatively thought of the idea. I saw persistence, both communication skills, communicating to your boss and to others about it. You saw a bigger vision of, you could have just sold and quietly sold what was given to you, but you saw an opportunity. So I saw lots of little mini stories there too. And then you had a hurdle just to convince the vendors in the area about that. So your selling skills were there. So I think you're right. A good, compelling story has mini stories, right? It tells
Yeah,
things about your character, about your skill set, and um, and then the fact that you laid out, and oh, by the way, this is a regular part of what they do now. That's, it's been there for a while. So great, great story, Steve.
thank you, Ron. Thanks. I think one thing, another point I want to make about that is there's, as you said, many stories. A lot of different qualities come through in that story. It's not just one quality about me. It's
Yeah.
like many qualities, and which is great, of course. But also that brings me to the point that you can sort of uh, spin your story a little bit depending on what kind of job you're applying for. So if it's a job where your sales ability is the most important quality, then you kind of emphasize that. If your communication skills are the most important, I can emphasize that part of my story, communicating with my boss, communicating with the vendors on the street. If one of the most important qualities is just your perseverance and stick-to-itiveness and hard work, pounding the pavement, then I can emphasize that part of the story. So I can use the story to emphasize different skills, different traits and accomplishments, and position myself, in the best possible light for the job that I'm applying for.
So you're telling us another little tidbit is pick the theme that's important to the story and make sure it matches what would be important to the employer. So
Yeah, and that's the
so
kind of yeah, absolutely, and that's the kind of thing where working with a coach can be very helpful to help to pinpoint that and fine tune it.
how do you assemble all of these things? I've been in the work history for many years and I have lots of things I'm proud of. How do you kind of assemble what, we're talking about figuring out what the employer wants, but how many stories should you have available when you go to an interview?
I'd say you should have like anywhere from 3 to 5. If you have more, that's great. Would say 3 to 5. That's a manageable number because they might ask for more, or you might realize in the course you want to be able to think on your feet and ad lib a little bit, improvise if you have to. But if you know, if from the certain things that you learn in the job interview, certain things that the interviewer tells you about the job and what they're looking for, you might realize that the story you went in with is probably not the best story to tell, but you have another story that's better. So you pull that out. So you want to have access to, I'd say, 3 to 5 stories. And to generate those stories, you should do a lot of work on your own. Um, you should do brainstorming, of course, write down your jobs, just brainstorm. What are various accomplishments? What are some of the things I'm proudest of? What are some of the things I did at that particular job or this other job that stand out? And don't sell yourself short in doing that. And also free write, that technique of free writing where you write nonstop for say 10 or 15 minutes on a given topic. Just say, I'm going to write about this job, what I did at that job 10 years ago for 10 or 15 minutes. Or I'm going to write about this accomplishment, the time that I put together a team that increased sales by 30%, or the time that I helped the company get out of hot water, with a public relations issue, as the case may be, or the time as a teacher when I took on kids who spoke English as a second language and found a way to integrate them into the classroom effectively. Whatever the case is, brainstorm about it, free write about it, and then start to use that STAR formula. There's another formula I want to mention, Ron, which is the 3 S's, which actually comes kind of more from origin stories. Origin stories, that you probably know, are stories that companies tell about how they got started. And some companies have fantastic origin stories, which become part of their marketing, like Cliff Bars has its origin story printed on every little package. Every little Cliff Bar has that, the story of how the founder of the company, Gary Erickson, was out on a bike ride, and he was 175-mile bike ride. And he was eating all these other brands, Cliff Bars, and he got really sick of them. And he had this epiphany where he believed that he could come up with a better Cliff Bar. And he spent the next 2 years working on the recipe in his mother's kitchen. And voila, now we have Cliff Bars, a company that's been thriving since 1992. So you take the elements of that, which is the 3 S's. That is, you see a problem, you solve the problem, and you share the problem with others. So it's kind of a 3-stage. Again, it's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's kind of a star. It's similar to the star in some ways. It's got, what are the circumstances at the beginning, the problem that you see? What's your approach, solving the problem? That's the middle of the story, dealing with the conflict, the struggle, as the case may be. And then the resolution of the story is, the solution that you share with others. Maybe you start a company, or maybe within a company, you start an initiative. You turn things around. You start a new policy or practice that sends the company in a new direction, that kind of thing. So the 3 S's are another thing you can brainstorm about, either whatever formula works best for you or seems to resonate most for you, whether it's the STAR formula or the 3 S's. Free write about it and see what kind of material you'll come up with. And then from that rough material, then to just write and rewrite, and come up with the best possible version of your story.
Well, you've given lots of tips, Steve, and the STAR approach will make you a star because you'll stand out from others. This is a big topic, and I know we could go on a lot more time. I'd like to wind, is there something that we haven't discussed relating to the accomplishment story that you'd like to mention?
Now, you've asked some fantastic questions, so I feel like we've covered really the most important parts. Except I would just encourage people to come up with that story. Don't feel like you're bragging. The interviewer wants to see you in the best possible light because they want you to be the right candidate for the job. That's what they're looking for, and you are. So just believe in yourself and practice that story before you get to the interview. I guess just keep in mind that job interviews, like a lot of parts of life, it's best if you go in expecting the unexpected, and just know that they might throw you a curveball. They might ask a question you weren't quite expecting. But if you have 3 to 5 accomplishment stories in your pocket, you'll be in a good place, ready to nail that job interview and ace it.
And you're making a valuable point too. If you're doing a good job, you're making the interviewer look better as well, because they've made a good pick by picking you, and so now you're giving them evidence of that.
Yeah, so, you're helping them do their job. Yes.
Great talk, and I really appreciate it, Steve. And I have a little slide on your background, but we've been talking to Steve Budd, creating compelling accomplishment stories. Have a good day, Steve, and much appreciated for your information.
Ron, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
You too.